My brother sold our family farm without telling me, so I bought it back and kicked him off the property. I never thought my own brother would stab me in the back like this, but here we are. Growing up on the family farm in rural Ohio was everything to me. Those endless summer days helping Dad with the crops, learning to drive the old tractor when I was barely tall enough to reach the pedals, watching Mom tend to her vegetable garden that seemed to stretch on forever. The smell of fresh hay and the sound of roosters crowing at dawn became the soundtrack of my childhood, and I honestly couldn't imagine life anywhere else. My brother and I were different from day one. He always talked about getting out of this small town and making it big in the city, while I was content staying put and carrying on the family tradition. Dad always said the farm would go to both of us equally when the time came, and honestly, I never questioned it because family is family, right? Wrong. After Dad passed away 3 years ago, things started getting complicated real fast. The funeral was rough on all of us. But what really got to me was how my brother kept talking about modernizing everything, or maybe even selling parts of the property to developers. He'd go on and on about how much money we could make if we just thought outside the box. But I kept telling him that some things are more important than money. This place wasn't just land and buildings. It was our heritage, our connection to generations of family who had worked this same soil with their bare hands. Mom supported my vision of keeping everything traditional. And for a while, it seemed like my brother was coming around to the idea too. He'd help out during busy seasons, and we'd sit on the porch talking about expanding the operation in ways that honored what Dad had built. Those conversations gave me hope that maybe we could find a middle ground between his business sense and my respect for tradition. The legal stuff took forever to sort out after Dad's death, and during that time, I basically ran the entire operation by myself. I was out there every morning before sunrise, checking on the livestock, maintaining the equipment, dealing with suppliers and buyers, handling all the paperwork that comes with running an agricultural business. My brother would show up occasionally, usually when there was something pleasant to do or when we needed to make big decisions together. What really started bothering me was how he'd bring friends from the city to visit, and they'd walk around the property like they were evaluating it for some kind of development project. They'd point at different areas and talk about things like accessibility and infrastructure, completely ignoring the fact that this was our family's life work. When I confronted him about it, he laughed it off and said he was just showing them around, but something in his eyes told me there was more to it. The breaking point came last spring when I noticed he was spending a lot of time in town meeting with people I didn't recognize. He'd make excuses about running errands or handling business, but these trips were happening way too frequently for someone who claimed to be helping run a farm. I started paying closer attention to his behavior, and that's when I noticed he was always on his phone, having hushed conversations that would end abruptly whenever I walked into the room. One afternoon, I decided to follow him into town because something just felt off about the whole situation. I watched from across the street as he went into the real estate office and stayed there for over an hour, coming out with a thick stack of papers and a satisfied smile on his face. My heart started racing because I had a terrible feeling about what those papers might contain, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions without solid evidence. That evening, I tried to bring up the subject casually, asking him about his trip to town and whether he'd taken care of whatever business he needed to handle. He gave me some vague answer about looking into insurance options for the farm equipment, but his body language was all wrong. He wouldn't make eye contact, kept fidgeting with his coffee cup, and changed the subject as soon as possible. The next few weeks were torture because I knew something was happening, but I couldn't figure out exactly what. He became more secretive, started locking his room when he went out, and would get defensive whenever I asked simple questions about his plans or activities. The worst part was that he kept acting like everything was normal between us, talking about future projects and seasonal preparations as if we were still partners in this whole operation. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was out in the barn fixing a broken fence post when my cell phone rang, and it was someone from the county records office calling to inform me about a property transfer that had been filed. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake or maybe a scam, but when they started reading off the property description and legal details, I realized they were talking about our family farm. The person on the phone explained that according to their records, the property had been sold to a development company based out of Columbus, and they were calling to verify some information about the transfer. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, as the reality of what my brother had done started sinking in. He had somehow managed to sell our family farm without my knowledge or consent, and I was finding out about it from a random government employee. I drove straight to the county office to get copies of all the paperwork, and what I found there made me absolutely sick to my stomach. My brother had forged documents, manipulated legal loopholes, and essentially stolen my inheritance right out from under me. The worst part was seeing his signature on all those papers, knowing that he'd been planning this betrayal for months while looking me in the eye every single day. When I confronted him that evening, he didn't even try to deny what he'd done. He just sat there with this smug expression and told me that he'd found a way to cash out his half of the inheritance, and that I should be grateful because the buyers were willing to let me stay on as a caretaker if I wanted. The complete lack of remorse in his voice was almost worse than the betrayal itself. This was my own brother treating me like some kind of business obstacle. That night, I barely slept as I tried to figure out what my options were. I called every attorney I could find, spent hours researching property law online, and even reached out to some old friends from college who had gone into legal careers. Most of them told me the same thing: fighting this in court would be expensive, time-consuming, and there was no guarantee I'd win, especially since my brother had been clever about how he'd structured the whole thing. But then I remembered something my dad used to say about never giving up on something you believe in, and I decided that I wasn't going to let my brother destroy our family legacy without a fight. I started making phone calls to everyone I knew who might be able to help, and that's when I discovered that the development company wasn't as solid as they appeared to be. They'd been involved in several questionable deals over the past few years, and they had a reputation for buying properties and then struggling to secure financing for their projects. This gave me an idea that seemed crazy at first, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. If I could somehow get enough money together, maybe I could buy the farm back from the development company before they had a chance to do anything with it. It would be risky and expensive, but it might be my only shot at saving the place that meant everything to me. I started by liquidating every asset I had: my savings account, my retirement fund, even the classic car that Dad had restored and left to me. Then I reached out to extended family members and explained the situation, asking if anyone would be willing to help me put together the money needed to buy back our family farm. The response was overwhelming. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and even some family friends contributed whatever they could to help me fight this injustice. The hardest part was keeping all of this secret from my brother while I worked on putting the deal together. He was still living in the house and acting like nothing had changed, making plans for his future now that he had a chunk of money from the sale. Meanwhile, I was working around the clock to coordinate with attorneys, financial advisors, and the development company to structure a buyback agreement. It took almost 3 months of negotiations, but eventually we reached a deal. The development company was actually relieved to get out of the contract because they'd run into some financing issues of their own, and they were willing to sell the property back to me for slightly less than what they'd paid my brother. The irony wasn't lost on me. My brother's betrayal had actually cost him money in the long run. The day I signed the papers to buy back our family farm was one of the most emotional days of my life. I sat in that attorney's office holding the deed to the property that should have been mine all along, and I felt like I was finally able to breathe again after months of stress and uncertainty. But the hardest part was still ahead of me. I had to go home and tell my brother what I'd done. When I walked into the house that evening, my brother was sitting in the living room watching television like it was just another normal day. I sat down across from him and pulled out the new property deed, placing it on the coffee table between us. The look on his face when he realized what he was looking at was something I'll never forget: confusion, then recognition, then complete shock as the implications started hitting him. I explained that I now owned the farm outright, and that he had 24 hours to pack up his belongings and get off the property. He tried to argue that he still had rights as family, that we should be able to work something out. But I reminded him that he'd made his choice when he decided to sell our inheritance without telling me. Family loyalty is a two-way street, and he'd already shown me exactly how much our relationship meant to him. The next morning, I watched from the kitchen window as he loaded his car with suitcases and boxes, looking back at the house one last time before driving away. Part of me felt sad about how things had ended between us, but mostly I felt relieved that I'd been able to save the farm and preserve what my dad had spent his lifetime building. This place represented so much more than just land and buildings. It was our family's story, our connection to the past, and my hope for the future. Now, almost a year later, I'm still here working the land and carrying on the traditions that my family started generations ago. The farm is thriving in ways it never did when I was sharing decisions with my brother, and I've been able to make improvements and expansions that honor both the old ways and the practical needs of modern agriculture. Every morning when I walk out to check on the livestock, I feel grateful that I was able to fight for something that mattered to me. My brother tried to contact me a few times in the months after I kicked him off the property, but I haven't responded to any of his messages. Some family members think I should forgive him and try to rebuild our relationship, but I believe that some betrayals are too deep to come back from. He made his choice when he decided that money was more important than family, and now he has to live with the consequences of that decision. The funny thing is, I'm actually happier now than I was when we were trying to run the farm together. Without having to constantly argue about every decision or worry about what he might be planning behind my back, I can focus on what really matters: taking care of the land, the animals, and the legacy that my father left for me. This farm is exactly where I belong, and I'm never going to let anyone take it away from me again. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't found out about the sale when I did, or if I hadn't been able to put together the money to buy the farm back. Would the development company have torn down the old barn where I learned to work with my hands? Would they have paved over the pasture where I spent so many summer afternoons as a kid? The thought of losing all of that forever still makes me feel sick, but it also reminds me how lucky I am that things worked out the way they did. People in town still ask me about my brother sometimes, wondering if we've reconciled or if he's planning to come back. I just tell them that some bridges can't be rebuilt once they've been burned, and that I'm focused on moving forward rather than looking back. The farm is my life now, and I'm committed to making sure it stays in the family for generations to come, even if that family is just me. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that my brother's betrayal actually taught me something important about standing up for what you believe in. It would have been easier to just accept the situation and try to make the best of it, but I'm glad I chose to fight for something that mattered to me. This farm represents everything I value about hard work, family history, and staying true to your roots, and I'm proud that I was able to preserve it for the future. The hardest part about the whole situation wasn't the legal battles or the financial stress. It was accepting that my own brother could look me in the eye every day while planning to steal my inheritance. That kind of betrayal cuts deep, and it changes how you see the world and how you trust people. But it also made me stronger and more determined to protect the things that really matter in life. These days, when I sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sunset over the fields that my great-grandfather first plowed, I feel a sense of peace that I never had when I was constantly worried about what my brother might be planning. This farm is exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure it stays the way my dad would have wanted it to be.